Hello to all fiction lovers. Today's podcast will be about Emily's mental illness. I will be your host, and now we begin. Within the literary work A Rose for Emily, it can be noted that the author further implicitly and explicitly addressed some type of mental illness that the protagonist of this work has, which is Emily, and her life takes place in an invent city, Jefferson from Mississippi. The issues of Emily's for submission are expressed in the storyline. The objective of this writing is to analyze the reason and consequences for which Emily suffered the problems, as well as its relationship with the plot narrated in the text, since it's tells about her whole life, that is her upbringing, education, family, and about all the most important moments that the protagonist went through and that marked her life. From another broader point of view, Emily's life looked of several years and was controlled and entered by her father, what did not allow her to go, and the only way to socially was by this relate. And it's in this way that the mental issues of the protagonist develop, because when her father did, she didn't accept it and believe that they was still alive. From these facts, it has been possible to highlight three essential aspects on which this writing will be based. The first is total isolation, the second is given by the loss of a love, and the third point is the consequence of these last two issues. As for the lack of social interaction, as Julio Verne exclaimed, loneliness and isolation are painful things and beyond human endurance. In other words, it's one of the factors by which the generative mental problem can be created. Since we need communication with the environment that surrounds us, as for the lack of love that Emily suffered, it is another factor or mental problem, because when feeling a rejection by the person you love, you are left with several ideas in mind, and you become insecure of yourself and finally about the consequence that these two great problems have had: the feelings, the expression, and what was mentioned from the beginning, the mates or mental imbalance that is generated in the protagonist. Part 1. In this first point, the isolation of Emily by her father will be addressed, and it's heard that they wonder why Emily's father made this decision. Actually, the writing gives out some clouds, since it's mentioned that the father here overprotects this daughter Emily from the men who were looking for her. He also didn't want to be alone, and that is why he had to take care of and for his daughter to accompany him. But if a person is socially isolated or feels lonely, they can put their physical and mental health at risk. Otherwise, the isolation that is narrated and has serious consequences for Emily. On the other hand, this action made Emily unaware of what was happening, since her father and current authorities had already did, though she that the obsession that they were still alive, and this is reflected in the part where Emily tells the delegation people, who were in search of Texas, but she mentioned that they go to the coroner, who had been deceased for 10 years. Also in this same part of the writing, the aforementioned is observed about his physical and mental health, since the clothes also fit him very well to the protagonist. It's as if she had been obese before, and due to the deterioration of the physical health, she lost weight because, as she described herself, she is someone very finished. It's for this reason that Emily's physical and mental health was at stake due to the total isolation by her father. But being alone didn't have to be the most prominent reason for the problems of the protagonist, since it can be corrected through certain treatment. But from this problem more important factor were tired that had a great impact on the brain on the feelings of this person. In addition, the writing implicitly mentioned several of these problems. Part 2. Secondly, we will tell about another important event in Emily's life, such as heartbreak. But what is heartbreak? It is a markedly emotional, psychological state in which the person needs to reduce their expression and feelings to the fact that the couple relationship that I had been waiting for will finally not materialize in reality. From another point of view, Emily feels insecure noting that the love of her life didn't feel the same as her. In fact, Homer Baron was one of the first people by whom Emily calling out of touching reality. Since we can say that she probably dreamed of marrying him, since the text relates that Miss Emily had gone to the jewelry store and had escaped and men's dresses in silver, while the letters HB on each page. In other words, she was obsessed with this person who had no attraction for her, causing a great impact on her, in addition to the one caused by the isolation in her mental health. Heartbreak and isolation have caused emotional imbalance in Emily, but this factor not only worsened her mental and physical health, but they also brought consequences, since each action has its reaction as nude purposes. And not the protagonist, in addition to not having a person with whom to interact and show his love, he will have to deal with the contempt of those people. Part 3. Thirdly, we will tell about the consequence of the two factors mentioned above, given that despite being totally lost, with signs of deterioration mental health, the protagonist had to deal with the consequence, since, according to the text, was known as the Lady of the Smelly House in Jefferson, because after the death of her father and leaving the isolation to which she was subject, she couldn't maintain her agent or that of her house. But that is where the question arises. Why do people have square mint? This expression because we look on the outside of people without considering that they may be going through it. This class of people cannot think beyond the reality of a situation and think that only they are right, even when they are not, and fall back over and over again in the same answer of truth. Other ways, it can be said that nobody is perfect, and what happened to Emily came from isolation. Another consequence is the constant visit on the entities that govern, since their objective was to clean the house of the protagonist, because it had of through strong other signs inside. It was the body of her father, a product of the mates for the one she went through. The only person Emily interacted with was Toby, the person who took care of her. Another consequence is the hypothesis that we have sought to refute, since the totally lost her meaning from each of the things that impacted her, and it could not be otherwise. Since isolation is the most important factor in mental terms and heartbreak is sentimental terms come together to implicity and Emily's life, which had heavy repercussion in her aftermath as she gained historical recognition for her bad smell and lack of mental health in the town. Conclusion. To conclude, can we ask ourselves if mental problems are genetic or acquired? Because in this literary text, we can realize that it arises from isolation and unfulfilled love. Isolation is due to Emily's lack of connection with the social environment, which is the most important argument of this work, and it's also one of the factors that allow us to say that the hypothesis rises at the beginning is true, since it worsens the physical and mental health of those who suffer from it. In addition, we have the point of view of lack of love, which is one of the reasons why many people commit suicide today. In our case, where the protagonists come from poor communication and on top of that, calling away a disappointment is like putting the icing on the cake, and full demonstration that the proposed hypothesis is fulfilled because the mental issues become great to the point of becoming uncontrollable, and all this is due to the forced submission of the protagonist, which bring terrible consequences to her life. Among these mentioned consequences is poor personal and home hygiene, which is judged by the locals, and as we could deduce, the atrophy of his mental health did lead him to reorganize within Jefferson, but not for his good acts, if not rather because of the events of her life and the hard blow with the reality from which she was separate for several years. This is all podcast for today.